Hello, welcome to Scribes and Songsters. I'm Veronique Mandel. We're talking history and music on the show today, so let's get to it. Our first guest is Herb Colling. Herb is a former announcer with the CBC, which is what first brought him to Windsor in 1979. Herb's written 5 books about the city of Windsor and was the recipient of the Hergé La Jeunesse Award for his work helping to preserve Windsor's history. Today, we're going to talk about his most recent book about Windsor's past. The book is titled Ford City. Welcome to Scribes and Songsters.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here.
And of course, we know each other from other lives.
A long time, yes.
A long time.
Yeah.
And at one point, we ended up on the same agricultural show.
That's right, yeah.
And so, I've often wondered, as I've read all of your Windsor history books, why didn't you write about agriculture since you knew so much about it?
Well, I never really thought about it, actually. The thing that intrigued me about Windsor history was that nobody had been talking about it. I think they'd talked about the War of 1812 by the time I came down here in 1979. And that was it that most people had discussed. And so I started to realize that there were all these other fascinating stories, and I've been writing about them ever since, which is kind of intriguing.
So how did you get started in the first place? I want to talk about Ford City in very shortly, but sort of what was the initial impetus? How did you actually get started? Did you call somebody up?
I met Carl Morgan, who was the former editor of the Windsor Star,
yes.
of course, and we had a common interest in antiques, and so he said, well, why don't we go over and over to the States and go to an antique town and sort of do the rounds, and we were kind of on the way over, and we were commiserating in the car, and he said, have you ever thought of writing a book? I said, well, yeah, but I don't really have any subject or never got around to it or anything like that. And he said, well, would you like to write about the auto industry in Windsor? And I said, well, I know nothing about it, so it seems appropriate. And so I did. And that started me off. It was pioneering the auto age, and Carl edited it and put it together. He actually published it with Travel Life Publishing. And it was kind of fun because Carl would edit at night and I'd edit at my home. He'd be at his home. We'd be both on the computer, emailing back and forth, and he'd edit something and then I'd re-edit it and he'd re-edit it and I'd re-edit it, and right up until the time of the publication date, it was the 11th hour, as it were. And 2 o'clock in the morning, we're going back and forth. And finally, Carl said, enough is enough. I'm getting tired. We got to go to bed. This is it. This is as far as we can go. And we'll put it to bed tonight and we'll do the same. And so we did. And it was a delight. It taught me to edit, for one thing, which was a kind of a handy thing to know. Yeah.
That's the thing about writing history books. The research it has to be really impeccable.
Yes, if you're diligent and actually do it.
Yes.
And that's the difficulty. Some people who write history books aren't that diligent and don't actually do it. But as you can tell, I like to get into the nitty-gritty of things, and
yes.
I should probably wear white gloves.
Yeah. It must make it more fun, though, because...
Oh, it's fascinating.
I mean, you dig up this extraordinary stuff about people.
Yeah, and I equate it like a puzzle, putting a puzzle together. And I used to love doing puzzles when I was a kid.
Yeah.
But you get a little piece here and a little piece there, and after a while the story takes a life of its own and starts to tell itself, and you just have to compartmentalize it and put it into those categories.
Yeah, and when you look at history, on the face of it, many people say, oh my God, history is so dull and dry. But what they forget is that history is about people.
Yeah.
And nothing, whether it's the auto industry or building bridges or anything, none of that it stands alone.
Yeah.
There are people involved in it.
Yeah.
And that's...
And actually, that's one of the reasons that I try to tell my stories in the present tense as well, because it brings it alive and makes it sort of personal. And I try to involve the people in my writing because there's some fascinating little anecdotes, and it might be just a little aside that maybe take 2-3 lines, but it gives that sense of meat and wonderment.
Absolutely. Now, so what sparked Ford City?
Well, that was kind of another interesting situation. I wasn't going to write another book, and this friend of mine, again from the press club, he said, "You've got to meet Dan Wells and write another book for him." And so he said he'd be interested, and so he was determined that I meet Dan. And I'd met Dan when he had his bookstore on Willette Avenue, because I'd always go in there because we worked at downtown, and so it was convenient on lunch hours. And he was into rare books in those days, and then mushroomed into the other publishing, and now is, of course, developing his little empire, which is quite fascinating in itself.
It is.
But so I approached Dan with a couple of ideas, one of which was the horse racing industry in Windsor, which I find fascinating. And I forget what the other one was, but he wasn't interested in either one of those. One was being done, and he said, well, I'm not really interested in the other. He said, what do you know about Ford City? And I said, well, virtually nothing, which seems to be a kind of a trait. Yeah. So I said, he said, would you like to write a book about it? And I said, well, I don't know if there's enough there, really to write a book about it, but give me a couple of weeks and I'll see. And of course, I started into the research in the library and some preliminary stuff, and found out that there was a wealth of material, and it was fascinating material. And so I said, yeah, let's go for it. Well, let's do it. And sure enough, we did.
When you look back at Ford City, was there a time when it was called anything else? I mean, obviously, or is it obvious that it's Ford City because of the Ford Motor Company? Yeah.
That's essentially it. The marvelous thing about Ford City was it was never meant to be called Ford City. In fact, they had all sorts of other different names, and I'm thinking Ford Park was one of them. That was the most popular one, and they actually voted for that one. But the mayor of the time decided he liked Ford City, and it wasn't even on the docket. And so he declared it Ford City and put it into the papers.
A bit grandiose, isn't it?
Well, it was a little sort of after the fact. He had to kind of apologize for it and explain to it that he preferred it. But that's how it got its name. But when you think about it, 1904, when the Ford Motor Company of Canada was started, it was it was called the Walkerville Wagon Works, and it was on kind of dicey ground because they were going belly up. And the owner of the company realized that he had to do something, or he was going to be out of business. And so he approached a maverick automaker in the United States named Henry Ford. And you have to remember, Henry Ford had gone belly up twice and was kind of not a sure thing in the industry whatsoever. And he approached him and said, well, would you like to develop a car industry in Windsor? At the time, in 1904, there was nothing beyond Walkerville. Windsor ended at Walker Road, and the rest was farm fields and woodlots after Tecumseh Road, roughly. Tecumseh Road didn't even exist, and there was just nothing. There were a couple of little minor plants. I think there was a pork processing plant and a barrel stave company and the Walkerville Wagon Works at the foot of what is now Drouillard Road. And that's where the Ford empire began. And Ford City grew up around the plant because he needed workers. And as the company grew, Ford City grew, but it grew meteorically, and it grew really quickly over a very short period of time. And in fact, there were a couple of hundred residents in the early 1904, for example. By the time 1930 came along, they were approaching 30,000. In Ford City alone.
That's extraordinary.
It's very extraordinary. Over a very short period of time, it mushroomed like crazy. And there was a time in the 40s, for example, when they thought that Drouillard Road, many people thought that Drouillard Road would be the main street of Windsor because it was a thriving little metropolis and a very important part of the makeup of the area. Now, the difficulty was that Ford City grew too fast and too progressively without any planning or zoning or proper controls, and it just mushroomed. And so there's a little bit of industry here, a little bit of commercial here, a little bit of residential over here, and it's a mishmash of everything, which doesn't work, quite frankly. And that's one of the major problems that eventually gave us the Drouillard Road area, for example. The difficulties that they face are from that zoning difficulty from the first place. Also, the houses were built really quickly. they were supposed to last 20 years. That's their lifespan. And some of them are still in existence
there.
120 years later. And they are so because of the people who, of course, who lived in them. They're generational families in many instances that have lived there since the inception. Many of their grandfathers, for example, and grandmothers have Ford City birth certificates and things like that. And the families just stayed, and they sort of replenished and updated the places and that kind of thing. And those are the ones that are in good stead.
Yeah.
The difficulty is that many of them became, after a while, absentee landlords, tenanted, and people didn't care, and they're falling apart, and they're falling apart now.
I'd like to go back to the heyday of Droulard Road for a second. I have some elderly friends who came over as war brides, and they used to talk about a big night out was going to Droulard Road. I mean, that's where you went. That's where the entertainment was, the good restaurants were.
Yeah, there were a lot of...
and I wondered why. And so now, I mean, it's starting to make sense.
Yeah, it was the going place. I mean, if you wanted to be seen, you'd walk down the street on a Saturday night and you'd see all sorts of relatives and friends. And it was kind of a neat communal place too, because there was a large immigrant population there as time went on. They came in to work for the plants and were escaping terrible conditions in their homelands in many instances. And they were very communal, and they would sit on their front porches and chat with each other and exchange news and events of the day. And it was very communal, and the kids would play in the yard together, and they all got along really well. And they'd have backyard barbecues and fires and all sorts of wonderful stuff. And so it was a great sort of style of life.
Through this whole process, I mean, your research in the book is really quite extraordinary, and that I found that so impressive. And
I sometimes wonder about that myself.
and I mean, there are so many other questions, but as you know, time starts to run out. And but I was wondering two things. One. Did you ever get a sense of sadness that it all sort of imploded while you were writing this?
Yes, actually. When you look at what happened in the 60s and 70s with the bike gangs that moved into the area and the drugs and the prostitution and that kind of thing, it all kind of devolved. And it was kind of sad. But the thing that I like about the area is that they're trying to rejuvenate it and bring it back. And there is that sense of community that still exists from people who are really proud and constant about the Droulard Road area.
Oh my goodness, Herb. I could talk to you for another hour about this.
Oh, at least.
And so at least. But where can people buy it? Ford City.
I have it in the trunk of my car, actually.
I'm sure you do.
Well, Big Oasis, obviously, because they're my the publisher. And it is available around town, but by all means, if people want, they can just give me a buzz at home and I'll deliver.
And you're in the phone book.
Obviously. I'm in the phone book, and 728-1579 in the 519 area code. That's the commercial.
Okay. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure, and congratulations. The book really is quite wonderful.
That's nice.
Thank you. Well, our next guest is Justin Latam, a very talented singer-songwriter from Leamington who recently released a new CD. We're going to find out all about him and what he's been up to recently, and we'll talk about that new CD. But first, here he is singing Barefoot, the title song from one of his previous CDs. Here's Justin.
Can't stand this any longer. This burning need to be set free from this oppression down below me, keeping my feet in captivity. When the laces they come undone and I slip my shoes off one by one. Now I'm barefoot, feeling alright. Barefoot, both left and right, both day and night. Now I'm barefoot, feeling alright. just simple freedom. I could not pay for what it's worth. When those places they come undone, and I go and slip my shoes off one by one. When I'm barefoot, feeling alright, barefoot, both left and right, both day and night. When I'm barefoot, feeling alright, barefoot. Nothing binding me or reminding me I'm not working for the man anymore. They are free to breathe. They are free. It's the way I've got to live. The way I've got to live is barefoot, feeling alright. Barefoot, both left and right, both day and night. Now I'm barefoot, feeling alright. Barefoot. B-A-R-E-F-O-O-T, that's my favorite way to be now. Barefoot. B-A-R-E-F-O-O-T, that's my favorite way to be now. Barefoot, feeling alright. Barefoot, 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 barefoot.
Well, that was Justin Latam with Barefoot. And I'm delighted to welcome Justin to the show. Thanks for dropping by.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, you're barefoot.
Yes,
Do you sing barefoot?
I always play my music barefoot. Yeah, it just feels right. I find it easier to get into the music, and often I'm kind of moving around a little bit, so you get some neat sounds off different surfaces when you're kind of stomping. It almost adds a little percussion.
That is really fascinating. And I was wondering if perhaps that was the case, that there was a different feel to the music when you're barefoot.
Yeah, it feels easier.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
So, where did the song Barefoot come from? What was the inspiration for that?
So it just was kind of born out of my lifelong love for being barefoot. I was raised by a mom who was barefoot all the time, and it kind of just came out naturally.
Yeah. You've done 2 CDs?
I think I've done 5 or 6.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm way behind. So take me through that process of making a CD. I mean, tell me about the commitment it takes.
So each project is different, but it usually starts with trying to get writing the songs and gathering up the songs, and then deciding how you want to present them. If it's going to be like a full band arrangement, or if you're going to, what is each song asking for, and then you have the recording process, which is a whole nother thing, and then it's really involved, but it's really fun.
Do you write all of your own stuff?
I do write all of my own
And do you
music.
do the arrangements?
I do, yes.
Wow, you're pretty talented.
Oh, thank you.
How long does it take for, let's talk about your new CD.
Okay.
So how long does it take from beginning to end?
Well, I started writing the songs on this CD. Some of them are probably a couple years old now, but once I had the songs selected, I kind of worked on arranging them for a couple months, and then recording was 3 or 4 days. Like, it was pretty quick because I did a lot of the pre-planning, and so I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 months total.
This is called Six. I assume it's because there are 6 songs.
Yes.
And this is a very cool cover.
Oh, thanks.
is that a self-portrait?
It is, yes.
So you're an artist as well.
I do kind of, I like to explore visual art and photography and, along with music.
Yeah.
And I find it helpful sometimes if I'm kind of stuck in songwriting, I'll kind of switch and maybe I'll draw or maybe I'll do photography and then kind of shakes things loose. I don't know.
Yeah.
And then come back to the music.
Yeah. Now, this CD is interesting in that I found the first song and the last song they've got a very bluesy feel. Is that deliberate?
Yeah, I would say that I'm heavily influenced by the blues and kind of blues rock, as well as folk. And like this project, I chose 6 songs that I wanted to present in a kind of stripped down acoustic style that kind of is, it's what I sound like when I'm live. And I mean, those songs originally I kind of planned for having a full band, but I thought it'd just be cool to have the kind of bluesy stripped down sound. And earlier we were talking about kind of stomping and getting some foot stomps. So we actually recorded my foot stomping in an old kitchen. So
that's
it's got some rhythm going on too. Yeah.
I noticed that you've got also like a ship theme.
Yeah, that was unintentional. So there's two songs about ships. One is about a ship called the Geronimo, which ran during Prohibition out of Windsor over to Detroit. And that was inspired from a beer can. I was having a Walkerville Brewery Geronimo IPA. And on the can, it tells a little, just a little story about the ship. And I read it, and it was kind of set up like 3 verses and kind of a chorus. So I just kind of did some research and set it to music. And the other ship song is called the DL Filer. And I'm from Leamington. So at the marina, they have all these plaques of all the shipwrecks in Lake Erie. Lake Erie has the most shipwrecks because it's so shallow, the storms just get wicked. And I just was reading them, and this one in particular, I found it interesting, the story. So unintentional, having 2 ship songs, but maybe it's my calling, I don't know.
Yeah. And I thought they weren't as mournful as something like the Edmund Fitzgerald.
Right, and I love the Edmund Fitzgerald, but I was thinking to keep it, do something upbeat, even though it is a shipwreck song and people are dying.
Yeah.
But I thought, kind of have something with energy and still tell the story.
And the other one I thought was very interesting, and I think I know what it refers to. Call Home. Would that be a child you're talking to?
It is, yeah. So it's written. The inspiration for that song originally came when I was visiting with my friend Vesna Bailey, who is an author from the area as well, and she has some books called Notes Before You Go, and it's written for children when they grow up and they're leaving the home. And the very last page of the book is just a white page with the black words "Call Home," and I was like, it kind of really hit me in the gut, because at the time my oldest child was getting ready to go off to post-secondary. So it was kind of a mix of personal and the outside influence, and then the song just happened that way.
Yeah, it's quite lovely.
Oh, thank you.
Now, you mentioned the first of your children. You've got a lot of them.
I do have 5, yeah.
I think people will be blown away when they look at you to think that someone who looks as young as you do has got 5 children.
Well, I think it's the music must keep me looking youthful, yeah.
What do your kids think of your music?
They're really supportive.
Yeah.
One of the best feelings is if I'm I play a lot of shows in the area in Essex County and Windsor. And so often they'll be coming out to my daytime shows, and it's so neat to see them there. Or sometimes just at home, I'll catch them kind of humming one of my songs or singing a lyric. And
Isn't
I'm just
that
like,
lovely?
it's so cool to have that. It's really inspiring and kind of helps keep me going. And
Do you tour?
yeah, actually in the summer. So when my new CD6 came out, I was out touring Ontario to promote it. So I kind of got around the province. And it was my first time doing a tour. And it was a great experience, a lot of fun to kind of get my music to new places and meet new people. And definitely gonna look into hitting the road again sometime in the future, yeah.
That takes a lot of commitment. And do you have a day job?
So currently,
besides music?
no, music is my full-time gig right now. I'm also going to St. Clair College as a full-time student. So
What you taking?
I'm taking autism and behavioral science.
Oh, wow. Heavy subject.
It is, yeah. And I just finished the educational support program last year. So yeah, that's what I'm doing.
It's interesting because young people with autism often respond to music. So you might be able to combine your talents.
Yeah, that would be interesting and neat if I could incorporate the music and have it be beneficial. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, talking about touring, there's a big festival in Kingsville every summer. Do you take part in that?
Yeah, so actually one of the stops on my tour this summer was the Kingsville Folk Fest. And it was really cool to be a part of that. So many great musicians from all across North America. And, the chance to play for a lot of people, that knew me and lots of people that didn't. And just meeting and talking to the musicians. And I'm still kind of trying to, every once in a while I still think about it and don't know if I understand everything that I learned.
Yeah.
But no, it was great.
You never stop learning.
That's it. You got to be open to learning and never keeps you from getting stale, I think. Yeah.
Now, are you working on another CD? Do you constantly write songs?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm working on another CD, but I am always writing, and I have tons of songs on the go. So yeah, not too long off. I'm sure there'll be another one in the works.
Yeah. And where can people buy your music?
So they can buy my music at my shows. So if you go to www.justinlatam.ca, you can check out where I'll be playing. And I always have CDs for sale. Or through my website, you can contact me, and I'm happy to mail out copies to anyone who wants one.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Best of luck with all the things you're going to be doing in the future.
Thank you so
much. And I look forward to hearing more of your music.
All right. Thank you again.
Thanks, Justin.
You're welcome.
Well, that's it for another edition of Scribes and Songsters. Thanks so much for being with us. Thanks to our guests, Herb Colling and Justin Latam. And thanks also to Brian and Gary for keeping it all together. I'm Veronique Mandel. See you next time.